Welcome. I am super looking forward to introducing you to a man named Donald Proffit. Donald goes by Buzz in his real life, but how I connected with him is I have a very good friend, Lee Post, in Anchorage, Alaska. We work together as child protective workers. We work together as probation officers. So decades of friendship. And Lee is an artist and cartoonist, and he also does group facilitation, like helps people run amazing and effective groups and takes notes for them. He came across Donald Proffit and was so impressed. He reached out and said, "This has to be your podcast guest." Donald wrote a book called Hardship Alaska, but a bit about Donald first. He is a former arts educator and school principal, and he's presented workshops all over the world, including in Australia, Belgium, Canada, France, Israel, and Italy. And he came to be an Alaskan educator. You know, I'm from Alaska. Originally I was from Kentucky, but raised in Alaska, moved to Tennessee a year ago. Donald Proffit came to Alaska because when the Vietnam War came, he had an opportunity, instead of going to serve in the Vietnam War, to serve at a different part of our country, Alaska. Back in the day when it was very, very rugged, he was an educator there. And he has been honored with the D. Bennett Mazur Award for Lifetime Achievement from the New Jersey Lesbian and Gay Coalition for having made sustained and profound contributions to transforming society at great risk to himself. He's twice received the Governor's Award there in Arts and Education, and he was awarded a John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts Teacher Fellowship. He's written a book called Hardship Alaska, and I love that title. If you're living in Alaska for any length of time, that will become your own personal title. It is a rugged, amazing place to be. But I'm really looking forward to conversation with Donald. Also, I'm looking forward to, I believe the date still sits on August 11th. Of course, today I'm recording on July 10th. This will be playing probably much after August 11th, but I should have Grounded in Grit already published, and I'm so excited about that. I look forward to never again being as new at something as I am this process of getting a cover artist, of the book formatting struggles and uploading into different vendors and getting, I have a trademark for Persisters Press. So that in itself, all of these things are a struggle the first time around, and they get easier. And I just listened to a podcast recently on Novel Marketing Podcast with Thomas Umstattd Jr. And that podcast episode was all about tortoise release of books. In other words, there's a movement for authors to feel pressured to publish as many books as possible and get their series out as fast as possible and sell books and keep people interested. And what this particular episode talked about was a method in which an author chooses to release a book about once a year on a specific date and lets people know to expect it. So letting you know that I think August 11th, being my birthday, will be a day that I release this book, as well as the following August. I already have a book into my editor. So just keeping that slow movement going as I do speaking events, a little coaching here and there, a lot of true crime interviewing, and hanging out with you on the podcast and some of you on Patreon. So I think that kind of works for me, and I'm really excited to be a little bit more in the flow and have a process. I hope your week is going great. Please feel free to share this episode as ever, give it a review or a rating. And thanks. If you want to hang out even closer and you haven't already, sign up for my email list at lameredith.com, where you get at least 2 emails a month telling you what's new, like in events that I'm presenting at or things I'm writing, things you might be interested in, workshops I'm giving. and all the things. So it's just a quick read, and it's not going to pummel you 3 times a week unless I'm at a book launch season. So thanks. And I will introduce you to Donald in just a second. Donald Proffit, it is such a joy to have you today. Thank you so much for being on Persistence U.
Oh, and thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me. I'm really
My pleasure.
excited to be here.
Well, excited to have you. I mentioned that our great connector was Lee Post in Alaska,
Yes.
And you and I share that Alaska connection.
Yes.
But before we go too deep into this, can you tell us about the time a natural disaster came and really bisected your life? Probably you've
Yes.
had a few of them, like most of us, but
Right.
one in particular that really got you to thinking about the
Yep.
legacy you wanted to leave behind.
Absolutely. Back in 2006, I was wrapping up my career in education as far as working with public schools. Here in New Jersey, I was principal at Lawrence High School, uh, right beside Princeton, and absolutely adored that job. That was a wonderful 6 years of my life. But in preparation for retirement, because I'm originally from New England, my husband and I took a trip up to Maine, and we were house hunting. In fact, found a beautiful home in Camden. We're ready to put down our deposit when our mayor here in Trenton, on a robocall, warned us of a flood, and it was time to evacuate. I live right on the Delaware River,
Oh dear.
and it sits in a 50-year floodplain. And so our neighborhood, which is 8 blocks long and 3 blocks wide, at the widest, um, was probably a place you should never build these homes. I know way back, Native Americans used to fish here, but they never lived here. So there was a clue, but I guess we didn't
Smart
pay
people.
attention. Right. So 2004 to 2006 would be the floodplain, the 50-year cycle. And it did. We had 3 major floods. On the last one, which was in June of 2006, while I'm up in Maine house hunting, this flood was particularly bad and devastated the neighborhood. And when you come back from these, you're dealing with the National Guard and the state police, local police, the Red Cross, and trying to get your house clean of all the mud and sometimes fish that would end up in your basement from the river. Um, Unfortunately, coming back, we had placed all my photos from my entire life, from a kid, family photos, my parents' photos, from even before me, in a big Tupperware vat in the basement.
Oh.
Supposedly waterproof, but once we got back and the place was cleaned and I opened the tub, I realized what had happened. So it was photos, it was negatives, it was slides, and it was um, my work, with teachers in school, in the arts, and a lifetime. And a big chunk of that was the time I lived in Alaska from 1970 to 72. Um, and those pictures were taken during a pivotal point in my life. I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War era. I wanted to get as far away from the West Coast as possible. I mean, the East Coast at that time, just greener pastures, try something new. I like to go to the edge sometimes, to the frontier, uh, just to push myself. But they were gone. All those photos were covered in mud and now sit in a landfill here in New Jersey somewhere, rotting. Um, so I retire. We decide we're not going to move because nobody would buy a house that's been underwater, until some years go by and you forget. So we took it off the market, and it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity. I started consulting with teachers around the globe, working with high school reform, the arts, project-based learning. And so I found myself flying, point A to point B, Philly to Portland, Maine, or to San Francisco, or every little place in between. And as I'm flying, I'm thinking about those images. And so I began writing. I would write what happened. It was an old theater game of here's a snapshot, and now act out what happens before and what happens after the picture that you see. So I took that exercise, and I started writing on the plane of, okay, what led up to the photo being taken? What is happening in the photo? And then what transpired after?
What a great
So,
writing prompt, by the way, for anyone who's listening saying,
yes,
I'd like to
yes,
write my life story, but how do I get started writing scenes? That's
right.
brilliant.
It was fun, and if you actually have the photos in hand, it might
All the
even
better.
it might even be a richer experience. Either way, I am not a writer. Um, I know that our personnel department had to be on my back all the time about getting reports in, doing this and that. It wasn't part of my wheelhouse. I just didn't think I had the skills or the
Right.
talent or the patience to do it. So I started writing these Alaska tales, and they began to form a set of vignettes. And by 2013, I had something, but what I had was maybe 15,000 words of all these disparate stories.
Okay.
So I continued. I shared some. Somebody would ask on a plane, "What are you doing?" And I would share the story. And they said, well, you know what? That has promise. There might be something there. Maybe there's a book. Keep doing it. So from that flood, from that experience of trying to retell that period of my life in the photos that I had lost, this book, Hardship Alaska, began to take form. Uh, but I also learned quickly, in not seeing myself as a writer, I had to get some help. So, in addition to sharing it with a longtime friend, Mary Wagner Lefevre, who still lives up in Anchorage, um, I sought help with the Gotham Writers Workshop. I took
Okay.
a sequence of courses in memoir, um, and then talked to the dean there and found a mentor editor, Colin Thomas, who didn't do line checks or spelling, but he asked these questions and provoked further investigation. So when I first met with him, I think I had 20,000 words. And then at the end of that year of working together on this, I had like 77,000
Oh,
words.
wow.
And
Okay.
so it came out then as that book. So um, I have to go back to the flood, and how that was the catalyst, the sourdough starter that led to this. And then it reminded me of uh, was the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, Bernice Johnson Reagan, and I'm just going to read one of her quotes that I kind of live my life by a lot of the time. She said, and this was a lead into the song "Wade in the Water." She said, and when there is a promise of a storm, if you want change in your life, you walk into it, right? And if you get to the other side, you will be different. And if you want change in your life and you are avoiding the trouble, you can forget about it. So Harriet Tubman would say, wade on in the water, it's going to be troubled water. So I look back to that. I could have just said, oop, I lost all my pictures and been done with it. But I took
Right.
that experience as a creative endeavor to see where that would take me.
That's absolutely lovely. That was in a book that you had read?
No, I had heard her say
The
that
song.
in
Okay.
concert with Sweet Honey in the Rock. So
I love it. If you would send that is just a beautiful quote, but that makes
absolutely,
absolute sense. You decided to, instead of put it out of your mind and say, what a huge loss, I'm forever
yes,
devastated. You
right,
decided otherwise. That's
yes,
terrific
right,
outcome.
yep. So it's been good. and then I went through that whole thing of 30 rejections, and on the 31st query to a small publisher, independent publisher outside of Seattle, Epicenter Press, they picked it up. So it's out there.
That is
Anyhow.
a story of persistence on its own. These days, and I just for listeners who don't know much about the writing world these days, there are many, many, many different opportunities for rejection. And the first is trying to get a literary agent. That is, it's just like dating on steroids. It's the worst, and
Yes.
so you put yourself out there with what they call a query. It's a letter
Yep.
saying, this is what I'm writing. This is why this is why I think people will care. I'd really
Right.
love you to represent my work and get the word out there. And then if they, by some miracle, any longer take you on as a client,
Right.
I heard one agent tell me one time he takes about 5 to 7 new people a year out
Wow.
of literally thousands of queries at the end of a year. So if by some miracle you're picked up by an agent and then they start with the publishing world, that's a new round of opportunities for rejection. So
Right.
good for you for
Yeah.
going the distance.
So I think it's that sense of perseverance too, of you just have to stick with it, and now at this point in my life, in my mid 70s, um, that's, I think, what carries most of us through. It's these challenges and that ability to face them, right? And then just
Right.
keep moving. And if you can do it in a creative way, take risks, be curious, keep learning, I think that keeps you living longer and living fuller.
Right.
So,
What do you think was the most important takeaway that you wanted your readers to get from your life story when you opened your heart up and shared?
oh,
I mean, there might
well,
not just be one thing, but
yeah, I think, I mean, the story has layers because some of it has to deal with um, my quest for receiving conscientious objector status from my local draft board. And
okay,
that was a 6-month battle. So it was one takeaway was um, it it can be difficult to prove to others what you really believe and stand for. That there is this element of moral courage that takes over when your principles, your ethics, your values are challenged, right? And that's usually because there's an element of danger. For me, I was being drafted. I'm a pacifist. I was not going to carry a gun um, to cause harm in times of war or peace. So it's that ability to say, this is who I am, in front of a group of people at the time with the war. It was hard um, to prove that conscientious objector status when they needed people to fight.
sure,
Um, and so it was multiple uh, um, appeals to the state and then to the national before that happened. So that moral courage, the element of danger, and then your endurance. How long are you going to sit back and let this happen before your principles actually kick in and you stand up for yourself? So I think the book has a lot to do with what you believe in, right, and how you act on it. The belief
right,
is great, but until you act on it, you can say you're respectable, or that you respect others, you're responsible, you practice fairness and compassion, um, but until you actually are engaged in that act, they're just words. So I think that was one of them. I think accepting myself. I was
mhm,
coming out, or you come in and out and in and out. I was out as a gay man in college, a very small music school in Princeton, and it was safe.
and
But
that
then
was in the
coming out,
70s. Was that in the
yeah.
70s?
So in the
Okay,
'60s, I was the last 4 years of the 60s, I was in college. I graduated in 70. So it was still considered being gay or being a homosexual a disorder, in the medical and in psychiatric circles. So, and parents who felt, my mother, if you come out, you'll never be a teacher, you could never be a principal or run for office. That was it.
Right.
Compounded with the same they felt about being a conscientious objector, right? That, not quite seeing that you were still doing service. So I keep trying to come back to your question of takeaways. Um,
What was
so,
it? Like,
so
what
I
is
would
your bottom
say,
line? Yeah.
yeah, it was, this is who I am. You guys raised me. You didn't raise me to be evil. Um, I can't help that this is where I am. So it's that, um, standing up for yourself, that perseverance, um, and you never really stop coming out. And family matters, in
Mhm.
community. So I hope I
You
didn't ramble
served,
too much there.
no, you served our country in a totally different way. When you finally got that accepted, you
Yes.
went and where did you,
Oh,
what did you do exactly
so
to serve our
so
country?
part of the battle was I could have fled to Alaska, I mean to Canada, and I had my immigration papers ready. Um, I could have refused to carry the gun, shown up for, you know, uh, my obligation to serve, and then end up in jail for 5 years. But in my heart and in my mind, I wanted to serve. I felt everybody should serve for 1 to 2 years, but in using their skills and abilities to
Mhm.
improve, the nation and communities. So that was my thing. I wanted to serve. So once I got the status from the National Appeal Board, which was somewhere early October 1970, I was then charged by my local draft board to show up for work on November 1st. Uh, but now I had to find a job. Back in, say, Korean War and World War II, most conscientious objectors would end up in a work camp. You a federal work camp, um, unless you were a medic and served in the military, but without a weapon. Um, so I'm working with the Quakers in Philly,
Mhm.
because they have this roster of approved jobs. Um, in other words, I guess the local draft boards and the selective service at the national level uh, found that it was probably easier for the CO, the conscientious objector, to find their own approved work. So I'm going through these lists, and I could have stayed in Philly, South Philly, and worked in a coffee house um, uh, to improve the neighborhood and offer a community center, um, because I was living in Allentown, Pennsylvania. But the draft board said your 2 years of service need to be a hardship, which I found ridiculous in that I really wanted to serve, and when should serving your country be a hardship? But anyhow, um, I could have done the Philly job because it was exactly 55 miles away from home. And what 55 miles is nothing. You can commute if you had to. Um, and I saw this listing for Anchorage Children's Services in Anchorage that worked with group homes, emergency shelters, residential care. And I applied. It just seemed like I could do that. I was being trained as a teacher. Um, I'm a musician, and I got this great position with them. I went up and did a 10-day journey by car. Um,
Wow.
fraught with all kinds of things, from being blown off the highway in Saskatchewan in the prairie by a freak storm, a gale came through, running into a group of Soviet ice skaters. I can't remember if they were a hockey team or the ice circus in Edmonton at the Holiday Inn,
Oh my.
um, doing shots of vodka with them once I found out that's what they were asking me to do. A breakdown in the Yukon on the top of a mountain pass.
Oh dear.
And so it was an interesting journey on my own in a little Volkswagen. First time, other than college, away from home, living on my own. And so um, it became this wonderful experience. Hard work. So the hardship was there. I mean,
Mhm.
working with kids in shelters, in residential treatment, coming out of just horrific family situations, was it took its toll on me. And I think because I don't know if it was the arts or I'm just extremely empathetic and sensitive, that began to take its toll. So I did that work for about 6 months, and my boss there, supervisor at the time, thought I should maybe get back in touch with music, and they helped me kind of segue out of working with kids for just a few months. Um, and I got involved um, with the Episcopal Church, St. Mary's in Anchorage, where I ended up being their music director, working with their senior youth group. I ran a coffee house. I set up the coffee house that I could have run in in Philly, um, and worked with we ran a homeless shelter out of the church in the summer. So I went from a gorgeous apartment downtown Anchorage on M Street overlooking Cook Inlet, uh,
Beautiful.
and Mount Susitna, the Sleeping Lady, to living because I couldn't afford it anymore if I'm not working with Alaska Children's Services, living in a closet. I'm in the closet. I'm living in a closet under the staircase uh, in the church, and that
Okay.
was my home for about 18 months
Oh my
after that.
goodness.
And they
Okay.
did a deal, so the draft board never realized that because the church worked with Alaska Children's Services so that the reports were still done and there was no interruption to my service.
Good. Good. So you were able to transition from Alaska
Yes,
Children's Services
to the church, and
to
then
the church.
started doing relief work or relief counseling at a few of the group homes once
Excellent.
I
And
once I got my head back together.
they're
Kind of
still
grew
doing
up.
some great work with kids in
Yes,
Alaska too.
yes,
My
yes.
career was largely intersecting with Alaska Children's Services. So
That's right. That's right.
that's wonderful. Well, what have you heard from people who've read the book? Because you did get a lot of buzz about it.
Yes. Well, you know what? It's funny because being a principal, a music teacher, the art supervisor, all of that, um, writing it and then seeing it published, I was nervous. I was like, what are people going to think? Because I I didn't hold back. There's a lot of honesty, of self discovery and exposure in the work. So I know I had one of my students who now lives in London. Um, Working in music copyright there. He said, "But well, Mr. Proffit, um, we loved you then, we'll love you now, but also understand we're in our mid-30s and going into our 40s. So, whatever you write, it's fine. We're not going to look at you differently." So and then I've gotten some wonderful response from my teachers, been invited into a couple of their book clubs for this year. Um, and so, yeah, the response was warmer, more accepting than I thought, and so it made me think that all of us have stories to tell,
Right.
and there's that fear of telling it, but once you can get over yourself, people are going to accept you for who you are, and those who don't, that's fine too. So yeah, the church where I live, St. Mary's, um, was particularly responsive in that they saw it was part of their history that they had lost touch of. That those 2 years, and with the rector, Chuck Eddy, who was there at the time, who passed from COVID a couple years ago, um, they saw this whole period of the church being a mission and then becoming a full-fledged church at the time, and then their continuing work in social justice. They think may have had to do with my being there. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to brag about it, but they think my presence there with Chuck Eddy, the rector, uh, helped him better embrace LGBTQ issues, as the 70s progressed and then into the 80s. So I found that powerful, that if the book and my presence had that impact, I'm honored. I'm floored by that, because you don't think that,
Right.
you're just living trying to figure out who the hell you are. So,
Well, that's excellent. That's
yeah.
really a beautiful thing about finishing this book, having the courage to launch it,
Hmm.
and then seeing what the response is. And, what a beautiful legacy to leave also. So, I mean, it's kind of a good thing that that flood came and
Yeah, well, because I think I think a lot of us can look back and see when there's been that obstacle, if you can remove it, or and, and your perception changes, right? And so there's something new on the other side of that
right.
that's fresh, and you just have to venture into it. Yep.
I love that. Fantastic. So, title of your book again, and where can listeners and viewers, if they're on YouTube, where
Sure,
can they connect with you best?
sure. Well, the title of the book is Hardship Alaska. I'll show you that. You can find it, on most online booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple, all of that. Um, bookshop.org is a great place, because I really believe in independent local bookstores. And if you purchase through that website, bookshop.org, your local bookshop that you designate will receive the profits on that sale. So I love that. You can go visit my website, which is Donald Proffit with two F's, .com.
Okay.
And there you can find the same links to purchase the book. Um, and there's a number of blogs that I started. And again, when I found myself published, I had a publisher who said, you need a website and you need to be on Twitter and this and that. You think it's going to sell itself, but it's up to you, the author, to sell your own work.
Right.
Yeah, donaldprofit.com, and enjoy the blog posts and the information that's there. It's all very experiential, in that some of the blogs and things are taking a risk with a new poem I've written, or even fragments from the book are in there. So.
Excellent. And
And
I'm
the last three all have to do with my recent book tour, where I was back in Anchorage just 2 weeks ago. So there's three posts that feature photo galleries of two book talks, and kind of rediscovering where I first lived, the closet and my apartment. So
That's so exciting. And I wish I had been there. That sounds beautiful. I'm
yes,
sure I knew a lot of the people in the audience. So
yes, yes,
that's terrific, including Lee Post. So I
yes. Lee
think
and Lee and Lee was phenomenal to have. Do I found that in working with teachers and doing community work, when you're leading conversations, and I love the World Cafe approach, which is 3 rounds of conversations in small tables based on questions that matter. Um, to have a visual practitioner on site with you who is sketching the conversation, capturing what people are saying, it's a whole other way of learning and processing uh, the information and the content, and the conversation and the people in the room. So yeah, if when you can do work like that with an artist, whether it's music or visual art, it's a powerful.
that was a great
Uh,
description too of what he does. So I need to put
yes,
a link in the show notes for
yes,
him as well,
yes,
because
yes.
a lot of us have meetings and we walk away and say, what happened? What did
Yep.
just happen last week? We had a good feeling about it, but then it went away. So
Right,
to have him commemorate it in a way that sticks in your brain is an
right,
art all its own.
right. And he left the 4 or 5 posters that he had done during the book talk session at the church were kept up on the windows so that on Sunday or whenever there would be a meeting or some other activity, others who didn't attend uh, the conversation could follow it,
Wow.
through
Okay.
his images. So it's powerful. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I will pause the recording